time to watch the movie Spirited Away, and boy, were we not disappointed. Greetings, Lovers of Lore. I'm Original Orchid.
And I'm Vicious Venus.
And today, in honor of the upcoming 20-year anniversary of the wonderful movie Spirited Away, we're going to be discussing, of course, the movie Spirited Away by Studio Ghibli. So, warnings before we get into it. Of course, as always, disclaimers. Firstly, these are our opinions, not facts, but if you do have any different opinions, then please feel free to share and comment down below or message us individually. We've absolutely treasured the comments you've left us in the past, and we love reaching out with you guys and having these amazing conversations. And secondly, other than the opinions, none of this belongs to us, except, of course, the opinions. Now, my co-host, would you like to summarize the movie?
Of course. So, Spirited Away is a movie about a young girl named Chihiro who, along with her two parents, are moving from their old home to a new home far away. And along the way, in their journey, they come across a strange abandoned amusement park. And Chihiro's parents accidentally get turned into pigs, for this amusement park is actually inhabited by spirits and witches. Now Chihiro has to find a way out of this world and save her parents from their fate of being eaten.
Brilliant, yeah. So, among a lot of different things that we enjoyed about the movie, particularly we enjoyed, among others, the characters, the world, and the morals discussed within it.
There were a few little details that we enjoyed as well that we will also mention at the end of the video.
Mm-hmm. So firstly, how the characters felt so cold and strange to us in the beginning, but later warmed up to us, and their distinct personalities. One of the most important, or at least one of the most significant to me, was No Face, his loneliness, and what prompted several of his actions throughout the movie, and why the bathhouse, of course, made him crazy. A lot of us have had relationships in the past where we feel as if we do this, if we do that with this person, if we give them this, we'll garner this affection from this individual. Many of us, including myself, may have even lied in the past. Like, oh, you listen to that band? You like that band? Yeah, I've listened to it. That movie? Yeah, I've seen it. That we've never listened to, or never watched, or never heard, without even thinking about it. Because our brains all of a sudden switch to a mode where we feel as if, in order to garner affection or emotion from somebody, we need their approval, or we need to work hard and provide to earn it. In No Face's case, it's the fact that he tried to give heaps of gold sen, bath tags, food, you name it, in order to gain affection from her, because, simply put it, he was lonely. He went crazy in the bathhouse. Because, like Sun said, everyone had some sort of connectivity or some sort of mutual trust or gain with one another that he didn't really have. And when he did everything there and Sun refused, he went crazy because he did everything for her. In his mind, he was like, well, I've done everything. Why am I still lonely? I think this is one of the concepts I most liked about the movie, actually, because it's so realistic. We don't think about our actions a lot of the times. We should, but we don't. And a lot of the times, humans are social animals, social creatures. We want this affection so bad from other people that we change ourselves in order to gain it. We provide for them. We do all this just so we can gain it. Does it really have any impact over our lives? Not really. But do we still do it? Of course.
Another thing about the characters that I really did enjoy was something that I really liked about Chihiro. So what I've noticed in a lot of stories is that the protagonist is either somebody that everyone loves or somebody that everyone really, really hates. There's typically two types of protagonists, one that is worshipped like a god, and one that is scorned, scolded, and just belittled for whatever they do. However,
Mhm.
Chihiro wasn't treated as such. When she made a mistake, she was scolded, she was told off, people got mad at her, and when she did a good thing, people complimented her, they congratulated her. It was a perfect mix of the two. In the beginning, most of the other spirits at the bathhouse didn't really like Chihiro. Later on, they began to warm up to her, and they began to distance themselves away from her when she made a really big mistake. In the end, everybody seemed to really like her, and she became friends with a lot of spirits in the area. But the general consensus is that Chihiro was a perfect blend of these two types of protagonists. She was complimented, she was congratulated, and she was also scolded and scorned.
Mhm.
Chihiro was never worshipped as some sort of god, but she was never, like, tossed to the side as some sort of unimportant character.
Yeah.
And that's what I really liked about how the other characters treated her, because, again, it's realistic. We'll compliment somebody if they do a good thing, and we'll scold them if they do a bad thing. We'll tell them off if they do something really dumb or stupid. And that's exactly how the other spirits treated her. This isn't a case that we see in a lot of main characters, but in Chihiro's case, it was quite realistic, and that was something that I really did enjoy.
Yeah. Adding on to that, in Chihiro's case, I feel like in a lot of these movies, like in systems such as this, they end up in some odd world or end up in some situation they weren't accounting for. They either portray this character who goes down and just cries and cries and cries and cries and cries and just doesn't do anything and kind of relies on other people to pick themselves back up, or it's this character who just isn't afraid. And in Jahiro's case, she was overwhelmed. It's natural to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to break down. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be human, but you need to get back up. In her case, she was overwhelmed. She was in this huge new spirit world that was so foreign to her. And she did cry. And yes, she did count on like Haku or her management person that helped her in the work she was doing. But ultimately, after her breakdown, she picked herself back up. Even if she did get some support, she picked herself back up. She was still human. She still made mistakes, but she picked herself back up. She didn't let that feeling of overwhelm get to her.
Yeah, I think you really made a good point there. Like you said, in situations like this, the protagonist is either completely helpless and just cannot do anything, or the protagonist, for some reason, keeps a cool head and does literally everything. I really did like that about Chihiro. It's completely human to break down in these kind of situations, but it shows how strong of a person she is for every time she, like, brought herself back up.
Yeah,
Speaking of
exactly.
a foreign world, another thing that I really liked about how they built the setting in Spirited Away was how this spirit world had a lot of similarities to our world, yet they always put their own twist on it. For example, the bathhouse. We all know what a bathhouse is. We've probably been in one, we probably haven't, but nevertheless, most of us have probably heard what they are and know how they operate. So when you first see a bathhouse in a spirit world, you might feel the sense of familiarness coming from this setting, like, oh, it's a bathhouse, I know what that is. However, as soon as you step inside, it's filled with creatures, spirits, and people you've never seen before. Like I said, it takes something familiar but then adds its own spin to it. This this forces the viewer to feel like they're seeing something familiar, to make them feel like they are in a familiar setting, but then later on, the viewer realizes that this world is nothing like ours. It's kind of like a mini subconscious sort of shock. Something that you thought you knew, but all of a sudden, it's not what you thought it was.
Yeah. And I think that adds to it that despite being such like a kids movie, like it's a Studio Ghibli movie with a fairly remarkably simple plot line. They made it in a way that was ever so enjoyable to people of all ages, and something that even or almost 20 years from now, in 10 days after the date of this release of this episode, we're still celebrating it. We're still watching it. Themes explored in it, such as what I said earlier, the naturality of just being and being human, but picking yourself back up, sorry, regardless. Nothing's black and white. The power of fear, greed. It's all these things. And the little conflicts that were there throughout the movie, which were later resolved at the end, which make it such a remarkable movie. Like I was saying earlier, the nothing is black and white. If we think about the actions of perhaps Haku, we portray him as this amazing protagonist because he helps the female lead. But was he perfect? No. He made mistakes. He, though, as when I was talking to Vicious Venus earlier, she points out some of it wasn't his fault. He made mistakes such as stealing from other people, choosing to be Yubaba's lackey without fully thinking about what it meant, choosing probably to kill some people, choosing to turn his back on some. At the end of the day, he wasn't human. Or sorry, not everything is black and white in that scenario. He wasn't a perfect being. But he did pick himself back up, and he did fight for it in places that mattered. Moreover, even in the places that weren't his fault, those still weren't black and white situations. Yes, it wasn't his fault, but he still did them. They weren't his fault. He still went on with them. They weren't his fault. He knew it. He knew that what he was doing was bad. He continued on with them. None of that's black and white. It's all shades of gray. But it's those shades of gray which show how normal he is. Because none of us are black and white. None of us are perfect beings. And a lot of these movies try to depict this perfect being. But like we've shown Haku to be, like we've shown Sen to be, none of them are perfect. And I think it shows even more so that they got happy endings. So a lot of the times when we're overwhelmed in life and we feel like, oh, this person's better at me than this person's better at me than that, they got a happy ending and they weren't perfect. So why can't we? Another one was also the
Yeah.
power of fear. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that I felt that it was like a really important theme that they often discuss, and it wasn't just with Haku. We actually see this with quite a few other characters. And I really like that they tried to explore that theme because in a lot of other stories they really do try to make it feel black and white, and it kind of feels just it makes the characters feel so inhumane. But I really did like how they tried to explore that whole black and white theme in the movie by making some characters morally questionable.
Exactly. And then more so in that, I think in kids' movies especially, a lot of people make it very black and white because it's like, oh, they're kids, they won't understand. Why not? Kids can't understand. Kids can't grasp these concepts because we've sort of trained them in a way to only think black and white. But with movies such as this, we're training these kids out of it. We're training them to look at the shades of gray. We're training them to know, okay, there's no such thing as just good, just bad. There's no such thing as just black, just white. It's always going to be some sort of middle ground. It's always going to be some sort of shade of gray. And that's not something a lot of kids' movies tend to explore. Not most movies in general, but particularly kids' movies. because they always seem to underestimate the directed audience, when in reality, those underestimations are the reason that these audiences perhaps maybe think that way, that they expect them to. Like I was saying earlier, another one of the themes that I thought were pretty cool was the power of fear. Like we were saying earlier, and like this entire movie ties to. Everyone's human. Everyone's going to get overwhelmed. Everyone's going to be afraid. But our biggest obstacle isn't those feelings, isn't what we're afraid of, but it's the fear itself. Fear serves as a roadblock for us, an obstacle. We think, oh, we can't get past it because we're afraid of it. Our biggest fear is fear itself. Harry Potter reference. But yeah, our biggest fear is fear itself. But when we overcome what we're afraid of, we take away that fear and it sets us free. We're not afraid anymore. We don't, we're free. We can do whatever we want. And that was really exhibited when the female lead in this movie was afraid. She was afraid that she was in the situation to begin with. She was afraid for her parents. She was afraid for Haku. But she overcame those. And she took away the obstacle of fear, which allowed her to do so much more. Anything to add?
No, nothing to add about themes. I really do think you've covered all of it.
In addition to that, I think what we were talking about earlier, which I believe that Vicious Venus is about to talk about, is of course the plot holes throughout the movie.
So yeah, obviously, like most movies, this movie does have a few plot holes, such as where did all these spirits come from? How did they meet? Like, how did Haku and Chihiro ever meet again? However, these plot holes didn't ever make didn't ever make the movie feel incomplete. These plot holes did not damage the quality of the movie. Rather, these plot holes actually enhanced it. As an example, I'd like to use the movie Your Name. So, they could have just ended the movie at the part where Mitsuha saves the town. They could have ended it there. I mean, it was practically an ending. The town is saved. Mitsuha and Taki have met each other. However, this is not what the people running the movie decided to do. They continued the story. They continued it on. And they made it so that we get to a point where Taki and Mitsuha meet again in the future. And that's where they end the movie. They see each other, they say, "What's your name?" And that's just where they end it. They leave it on a mini cliffhanger, so that way the movie does feel sort of complete, yet incomplete, to the point where the viewer themselves can imagine how the interaction went. This is something that I really do like about certain cliffhangers if they are used correctly. They complete the movie in a way that allows the viewer to continue to imagine the characters. There is no finality. There is no the end. There's an end to this movie, but not to the story of these characters. You can continue to imagine them doing whatever they're doing. It's as if their life still continues despite the movie having ended. The plot holes, the small cliffhangers they left in Spirited Away were there for a reason. For example, they didn't show Haku and Chihiro meeting in the future, but we can imagine that happening. Haku said that he was going to end his apprenticeship with Yubaba, so we can clearly imagine them meeting up sometime in the future. The movie ended, the conflicts were resolved, but the story about these characters did not end. There was never the end to the story. These characters still have lives, and we as the viewers can continue to imagine it. these plot holes really served as a device that enhanced the quality of the movie rather than making the movie feel incomplete or poorly written. And I really do appreciate plot holes and cliffhangers like these.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you were saying, the Your Name reference, if they left off Your Name with the town being saved and the female lead looking at her hand and seeing the words "I love you" written on them, which, by the way, why didn't he write his name on there? Like, "I love you," and then write his name under it? I don't know, but yeah, if we left it at that, there'd be some sort of incompleteness inside of us. And you might argue, well, when isn't it incomplete anyways? Because guys don't want finality to the story. We want finality, but there's a difference between leaving an ending for the story and keeping it open at the same time. In this case, they would have just kept it entirely open on both sides, and you'd feel very, very complete if the movie had just ended there. You'd be like, so we're just gonna end on his mistake? But in this case, we leave it off with Chihiro running out of the tunnel, seeing her parents, looking back, but then ultimately going forward, before having talked to Haku and asking, "Do you think we'll ever meet again?" Him saying, "Of course," and then promising that they will meet again. It gives us some sort of completeness knowing that she's going forward with her life, but it also gives the audience some sort of interpretation in their own right in the story, and they can choose what happened afterwards, what happened after she went forward, what happened when her family drove away. And it's things like those, which I was talking to Venus earlier. It's things like those that gives it some sort of thing that we have control over the story. In my tense, the way I like it is I've started imagining headcanons like, oh, she goes back to the Kohaku River and she goes there free, talks to the river. Everyone thinking she's pretty crazy. But she talks to the river and she's talking to Haku. It's headcanons like those and endings like these that allow us to have these interpretations in our mind and allow the story to continue. Something I deeply appreciated. Adding on to that, that leaves questions like, why couldn't Chihiro look back when she was leaving? And more. Questions like, the greed in it. Like, why'd her parents just assume because they have money and cash that they can eat the food instead of actually thinking, oh, this food may not be for sale? And their greed ending up into very severe consequences and getting turned into pigs. Things like those that we think about only because there's some sort of thing in our mind that's telling us the movie's over, but the story isn't. It also allows us to
I
see
also
things like
like
minuscule details.
I also just wanted to add to the um to the plot holes. I think that good stories allow readers or viewers to interact with the story itself. So plot holes and cliffhangers like this allows the viewer or the reader to interact with the story and have their own interpretation on it. And the fact that a kids movie is doing this is I appreciate it a lot. I really understand the amount of effort they have taken into this.
Yeah. And like I was saying, it's things like these that allow us to look for the minuscule details, like small crossovers. For example, the ones we were able to sort out after talking about it were from the Suit Sprites, which I actually talked this week's episode of a short episode of a few of my thoughts after watching Your Neighbor Totoro for the first time. The Suit Sprites that were first in Your Neighbor Totoro, and then we see them again in Spirited Away. And then also, what I didn't notice until Venus did, which Venus, you can explain this, is the slipper.
So, in case you didn't know, in the movie My Neighbor Totoro, there is one part where May, the younger sister, runs off to the hospital and sort of goes missing. At one point, the villagers who were looking for May find a slipper of a little girl in the nearby river. They all believe that it might be May's, so they come to the conclusion that May might have drowned in the river. However, when Satsuki, the older sister, inspects the slipper, she says that it's not May's. So I've actually heard a few fan theories about this, and I honestly think it's really cool. But some people believe that the slipper was actually Chihiro's slipper for when she fell into Haku's river. And I think it's really cool because it does make sense for these two movies to live in the same universe because they have similar themes and like similar characters. So I just found that as a really cool detail, and I really do appreciate like thinking about these characters living in the same world and like living in the same place and perhaps interacting.
Yeah, same. And then also regarding to things being in the same world, it's so cool to think, and I know a lot of people have actually made this comparison. Comment down below if you want us to do sort of a tie it all together, where they've tied several Studio Ghibli movies together to show that they're all in the same universe, particularly these two movies because they're directed by the same incredible director. And then also, they also have little details in their world that are pretty similar. As most people actually think that these are both post-war movies in Japan. And then also the thing about the most characters looking slightly human, yet at the same time not human.
I feel like that kind of detail ties in with the whole thing about the spirit world being similar to our world, yet still feeling strange. So, one thing I noticed is that a lot of the spirits, mainly the ones that work at the bathhouse, looked slightly human or wore like a human attire. However, they had some characteristics and qualities to them that made them feel inhuman. So this made for a perfect blend between feeling familiar yet feeling unfamiliar and foreign. So I really did appreciate that kind of detail cuz made it made the setting feel more correct and right. The characters really did fit in with the setting better because of the way it was styled. And I honestly, it to me it felt like good writing to like think of something like that.
Exactly, yeah. So with that, is there anything you'd like to add to the movie on our thoughts?
No, I believe I've talked about everything I really like about this movie.
Me as well. So thank you so much for tuning in to this week's installment of the Whimsical Whispers podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider following back for next week's edition and more editions to come, which come out every Saturday. And thank you so much for supporting us. If you have watched the movie, which you definitely should, by the way, feel free to comment down below or message us on what you enjoyed or things you thought while listening to this episode. Thank you so much.
Hello.
We can edit this extra step out. In honor of the upcoming 20-year anniversary for the long awaited movie Spirited Away, I introduced my co host for the very first